It's a story that the guy who appointed you would end if he was in charge again. It's a story that most of the folks on the other side of the aisle seek to block every day in this room, but it's a story that's persuasive. You want your report to be received with credibility, is that right?
My goal was to provide a thorough explanation of my decision to the Attorney General as I was required to do. And as I said in my opening statement, I felt that I needed to show my work.
And you want to be received as credible, right?
That would be helpful and laudable, yes.
Well, a lot has changed since 2018 for the person who appointed you, former President Trump. Since you were appointed, he was impeached for leveraging 350 million US taxpayer dollars over Ukraine to get dirt on President Biden. He was then impeached a second time for inciting an insurrection. He was charged for possessing classified documents and obstructing justice. He was charged for paying for the silence of a porn star. He was charged in Georgia for his role in January 6th. He was charged in the District of Columbia for his role in January 6th. He owes $400 million to the state of New York for defrauding the state through his taxes, and he has been judged a rapist. You want to be perceived, understandably, as credible, and so I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Here it comes.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like an easy
about
answer.
what will happen.
I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it. And
But you don't want to be associated with that guy again, do you?
Congressman, I'm not here to offer any opinions about what may or may not happen in the future. I'm here to talk about the work that went into the report, which I stand by.
This motherfucker was looking.
There were
for
no
a
limits on you as
seat
to
in the
what you
next
could charge President
administration.
Biden by the Attorney General. Is that right?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The
he literally just
decisions,
asked that.
that I made that are reflected in the report are my own.
And you did not bring any charges. Is that correct?
Correct.
There were no limits on John Durham and his investigation of the prior administration when he was special counsel. Is that right?
I don't believe I have the information required to answer the question about the Durham investigation.
Well, he sat in the same chair that you're sitting in. He told us that he also investigated President Biden and President Obama and did not bring any charges. President Biden sat for an interview.
Schiff
with you,
did get him
over
to
2
admit
days
that
for
Russia
approximately
helped
10
Trump,
hours. Is that
though.
right?
A little over 5 hours, Congressman.
Over 2 days.
Correct.
You know, that's in sharp contrast to a guy who did not sit for an interview when the Mueller investigation took place. That was Donald Trump. Did not sit for an interview when he was impeached in this committee room by the Judiciary Committee. Did not sit for an interview when the second impeachment occurred and he was invited to sit for an interview for his role in January 6th. And did not sit for an interview in the January 6th in the January 6th case or the classified documents case. Chairman also has not sat for an interview in his own subpoena, but Joe Biden has. I now want to turn you to
Joe Biden also wasn't on Epstein's list.
Day 1, page 47. You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Oh, boy.
Those words.
Here's where the perjury begins.
The Republicans were not expecting this to turn into a gnarly, flaming pile of gorilla shit before their very eyes.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
I now want to show you and play a video of what is absolutely not photographic.
In the failing New York Times by...
Oh, they're playing the Trump video again!
It's really an ominous, gutless...
No!
We're a nation that just recently heard that Saudi Arabia and Russia will repeat
I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of
This is the second time they've used this reel.
And I watch our police and our firemen down at 7-Eleven, down at the World Trade Center.
And we did with Obama. We won an election that everyone said couldn't be won. This is the very definition of totalitarianism.
And let me begin by wishing you a beautiful... Look, do you remember this? Do you remember?
God bless the United States. The windmills are driving them crazy.
Oh,
They're
shush.
driving the whales. I think
It's the
a little
Swalwell
batty.
remix.
And I went to
gentleman
Puerto
has
Rico
expired.
and I met with the president of the
Oh, they cut it off.
Oh!
Back. The chair now recognizes.
Oh! Someone got their feelings in
Thank you,
it.
Mr. Chairman. Mr.
Bind.
Hur, I'm way down
Right
here.
when he was out of time, they cut
Oh, come on,
I
Jim.
think today the
Just
Justice
treat it like it's
Department
boys'
released the
shower and look
transcripts of
away.
the interviews with President Biden. Are you aware of that?
It hurt his little feelings.
I understand that to be true. Yes.
Did you have any involvement in the decision or the timing of the release of the transcripts?
No, Congressman.
Did you make any recommendation about the release of the transcripts or being
Didn't this
done or not?
motherfucker used to
I
chafe
did not. That was
Smurfs
above
when
my
I was a
pay grade.
kid?
Yeah, I don't know why they've been released so close to this hearing, but it sort of it
I
impacts our
didn't know they
ability,
would
ability
release
to
the
evaluate your
transcripts that
report and ask
expose
you
us as
questions about
liars
stuff.
right away.
There's one.
Yeah, they
point,
thought they were going to
just
get
as
a
an
couple weeks to
illustration,
let it cook.
On 221 of your
Gargamel,
report,
you're right,
you're
Gargamel.
describing, I think, as the Afghan
Yeah,
pact
they
or
thought
something
they were
like that
gonna
about in
let it cook.
2009, I think is the information
Like,
came from.
you know, and be able to spend shit
and
for
you
2
say,
weeks.
As one reason not to prosecute, Mr. Biden says, in addition, Mr. Biden told us in his interview that he does not recognize the marking confidential as a classification marking. To him, the marking means the document should be held in confidence, but not necessarily that it is classified. And footnote 866 is a reference, and it refers to the Biden 10-9-23 transcript at 24 and 25. Now, we have that now, but we haven't until this morning. But I just want to read from that exchange. This is on page 24 at line 15. Mr. Crickbaum. So this is a typewritten document. It's got a confidential, what appears to be a stamp at the top. And the top of the document indicates it's from the American AM Embassy, Kabul. It's dated what appears to me to be November 09. The only question I have for you about this, Mr. President, is the confidential marking. Do you recognize that to be a classification marking? President Biden, no. I mean, confidential doesn't want to get around. It's not in a category.
I don't think they like the fact that this report's already been published.
Top secret, that kind of thing, but I don't even know where it came from.
Not at all.
Mr. Crickbaum, are you familiar with
because
confidential as a level of classified information? President Biden, well, if I got a document that said confidential, it would mean that no one else could see it but me, and you give it or the people working on this issue. Mr. Crickbaum, and are you aware that among
They seem to
certain
think that if they
categories
just
of
continually keep
classified
making
information,
shit
there
up
is top
or pointing things out in the transcript, quote
secret,
unquote,
and there's also
that
a
it's going to
category
change the result.
It's not. And they're twisting a lot of that around that's already in the transcript.
classified information called confidential. Is that something that you are aware of or not?
Vixen on
President
Blue
Biden,
says, dummy ass dummies.
Yes, I was aware of it. I don't ever
You big
remember
dummy.
when I got any document that was confidential that was meant for me to read and or discuss with the people who sent me the memo, so. And then it trails off. So as I read those answers, they're equivocal. He at first says he doesn't know. Do you recognize that to be a classification marking? He said no, and then goes on to explain. But then Mr. Crickbaum came back and he said, are you aware that among certain categories of classified information,
Keep fishing. You're not
there's
going to
also a
find
category
anything.
of classified
like-
information called confidential? And he says, yes, I was aware of it. So Mr. Hur, just in that one instance, there seems to be
Like
a
all they're
discrepancy between
doing
the
is
conclusion in the
just
report or
wasting
the
their
summary of the evidence in the
time
report
because
and what the transcript says.
report's
Can you
already
offer any
been
guidance
made
to this
in
committee
giving
why you would
the Democrats
that,
carte blanche to
summary
just
in your
not only
report
refute
as
their
opposed to
bullshit,
saying
but also to keep
that
pointing
he gave
fingers at Trump.
inconsistent answers, or in fact, why didn't you nail down in the transcript which
His
was
next
the right
question
answer?
is going to be, you got
He's
any
getting
aces?
answers that says
Go
no,
fish.
and then he says yes. Why didn't you pursue it until you knew?
Congressman, the
And didn't
report
this dude
reflects our
quit?
best efforts to summarize
did.
and characterize the evidence in the investigation,
On
including
Monday.
the investigation received from the president
Wow,
himself
that
during
doesn't
our
look good,
interview
does
of
it?
him. But as you point out,
No.
the transcripts of the president's interview over 2 days are now available. to
The night
committee for
before,
their inspection.
Vixen on Blue says,
The members are able to
Burnt.
draw their own conclusions based on the
Wow.
transcripts that are now available to them.
Well, and I appreciate your answer, and I certainly think things, you can come up
with some details that someone can disagree on, and it has the quality, I know, of some cherry picking because I've just found something, but we've only had a little bit of time to look. I don't think it serves this process well for the Justice Department to dump these transcripts into the public right now. If they were going to be released, they should have been released at a proper time.
Yeah, you
and I
want
think
time
I'll
to
leave
spin
at
it.
that,
We
Mr.
don't want to hear you
Chairman. I'll
crap.
yield back.
The gentleman yield? The gentleman yield?
They want to pull a Devin Archer.
I will yield to the chairman.
Just real quick, Mr. Hur, someone earlier said, said something about changing the facts. You said, I'm not going to change the facts, but let's keep the facts the same, but change the subject. If you had the same facts and the individual that you were investigating was 65 and had a good memory, do you reach the same conclusion?
Congressman, as I responded earlier to a question along these lines, I am not here to entertain hypotheticals about facts or circumstances.
Well,
that may
at
be
least he's
different.
not giving
What I
them
did
the
was assess
soundbite they
evidence
want.
and the facts that I obtained in this investigation and make a judgment based on this set of evidence.
Fair enough. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. In your investigation, you reviewed more than 7 million documents and conducted 173 interviews of 147 witnesses, including President Biden. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
And your 15-month investigation cost several $1 million and resulted in a comprehensive 345-page report with several dozen pages of appendices. Is it correct that, as it says in the first sentence of your executive summary, that your investigation concluded with an assessment that, quote, no criminal charges are warranted in this matter?
Correct.
There it
So
is.
this lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden. For every document you discussed in your report, you found insufficient evidence that the president
that?
violated any laws about possession or retention of classified materials. The primary law that you analyzed for potential prosecution was part of the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793E, which criminalizes willful retention or disclosure of national defense information. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of the word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word that
I'm
appears
going
in
to
the report,
continue
and
with
that's
my
not part of my
questions.
task as
I'm
Don't
going to continue with my
filibuster.
questions.
Answer the
I know
question.
that the term,
I ultimately reached
I know
related to
that the
whether
term-
sufficient evidence existed such that the likely
you didn't,
outcome
you
would be
exonerated
a
him.
conviction.
I
You
know
exonerate,
that the term
exactly.
willful
That word does not appear in the
retention has a,
report, Congresswoman.
Mr. Hur, it's my time. Thank you. I know that the term willful retention has a particular legal meaning, and I want to make sure that that meaning is absolutely clear to the American people before we go any further. As you wrote in your report, to prove as a matter of law that the president, quote, willfully retained any documents, you would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt two elements. First, that the president
getting some
knowingly
buffering.
retained or disclosed national defense information, and second, that he knew that this conduct was unlawful. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And to be very,
and
very
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, that it was national defense information. That's an important third element.
Okay, thank you. To be very, very clear, you did not find sufficient evidence to prove either of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt to show that Mr. Biden willfully retained any of the classified national defense materials that were recovered during your investigation, correct?
My conclusion was that the admissible evidence was not sufficient to make conviction at trial a probable outcome.
Not sufficient. Thank you. Let me ask you about a few specific examples so the American people are clear. One set of documents was discovered by investigators in the president's Delaware home. His staff had assembled those documents into binders in 2014 to prepare him for an event with Charlie Rose. Some of the documents in those binders were marked classified. You reviewed all of the facts surrounding the classified documents in those binders, and you determined, and this is a quote from your report, these facts do not support a conclusion that Mr. Biden willfully retained the marked classified documents in these binders, correct?
That language does appear in the report.
You also reviewed another set of classified documents from the president's home related to the Afghanistan troop surge in 2009, and you evaluated whether the president willfully retained such documents in his Delaware home or a home that he rented in Virginia in 2017. In your report, you said that there was, quote, a shortage of evidence, end quote, for any wrongdoing, and, quote, other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute, end quote. Are those quotes correct?
Congresswoman, if you have particular page sites for those quotations, I'd be happy to confirm their accuracy.
Page 6. Right up on the screen.
With respect to the two quotes that are on the screen,
Oh boy.
in addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for documents we cannot refute, and we conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict, and we decline to
I was
recommend
just going to get to that,
prosecution.
and you concluded that,
Those quotes
quote,
do
"The
appear on
evidence
page
is
6 of
not
the report.
sufficient to convict, and we decline to recommend prosecution," end quote. Those are your words in the report, correct?
Those words appear in the report.
Thank you. President Biden's counsel discovered a different set of documents at the Penn Biden Center and voluntarily turned them over to the FBI. Those documents contain national security information, but you determined that you could not, in fact, prove that President Biden willfully retained those documents because, quote, "The evidence suggests that the marked classified documents found at the Penn Biden Center were sent and kept there by mistake. Therefore, we decline any criminal charges related to those documents," end quote, correct?
Hey.
The language "we decline any criminal charges related to those documents" does appear at page 311 of the report.
Thank you. You also reached a similar conclusion regarding the documents found in President Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware. Quote, "For these reasons, it is likely that the few classified documents found in Mr. Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware were there by mistake," correct?
That language does appear at page 325 of the report.
So it seems to me that the crux of the report, the main story, is that you found insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained any classified materials. That is the story of this report. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back.
Son.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thank you, Special Counsel, for being here.
Oh,
in
hey,
these challenging
it's
times.
Moose
And I
and
want to tell you a
Squirtle.
few things that is interesting for me. You obviously could see that there is a motive. There is
Vixen
an
on
legacy.
Blue says
You
it's his
obviously
fucking
see that it was
report,
a
and that's
willful
true.
retention of this document.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Exactly.
But
Democrats
it's
make it look so
interesting for
easy
me
because they
that
have
when you
facts.
talk about
Instead, she has to sit there and try to keep
sympathetic,
spinning
well-meaning,
this
older
mess.
man with poor, elderly man with a poor mememory.
See,
It
they
seems
keep
like
trying to
every,
use the one
attorney
quote.
would advise you to be sympathetic and be well-meaning, and it seems like the whole FBI needs to do based on my hearings here, I need to do check on amnesia because everyone says doesn't recall. So it's
You mean like Marjorie Taylor Greene says that?
something way more in his recollection. There's a typical I don't recall because that's what ever seems like that. I've learned it here. So is there something
She told
more than
Robert Hur that she would give him
that just,
Turkish
I don't
delights.
recall something for you to actually decide because it's
Vixen on Blue says, "Good God, when did the witch from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe join Congress?"
Yeah, right.
Yes, Turkish delights. She promised everybody.
Congresswoman, my judgment
can
as to
hardly
how a
understand
jury
her.
would likely perceive and receive and consider evidence relating to all the evidence that would be put in by both the government and the defense at trial, it was based on a number of different sources, from documents, including various recordings, some of them from the
She's the
2016,
blonde
2017
version of
timeframe,
Natasha from
some
Rocky
from
and
our
Bullwinkle.
interview with the
Yeah, I
president in
said,
October of
like, I'm just waiting
2023.
for her to catch
I
Moose
think what
and
you're asking about
Squirtle.
specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year.
Boris,
And of course,
darling,
I did take
Ukraine
into
gets
account
no
not just
aid.
the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color in real time of how the president presented himself during his interview.
Hopefully he didn't outsmart you and all of us. But before I yield, I just wanted to actually just comment on something, Mr. Raskin mentioned about, us not remembering communists. I actually grew up under communists, and I have a very good recollection what it is. And unfortunately, Terrence on the rise, on the march, which he said, unfortunately, they've been emboldened by, President Obama, now by President Biden too. And unfortunately, our government in
Nice projection. You mean all the Nazis have been emboldened by Trump, DeSantis, and people like Carrie Lake? Tired of the fucking projection. I'm calling it out in real time.
But I'm going to yield to Chairman Jordan the rest of my time.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Hur, during your
Vixen on Blue says, or funded by Smirnov or one of the numerous other Russian operatives infesting our government.
5 letters that they
spreading Russian propaganda in order to try to impeach an American president on your tax dollar.
The White House counsel's office, and as well as the president's personal counsel.
Right, they're either special counsel or personal counsel. I see who signed the letters. And did the White House get the report before the report was made public?
We did provide a draft of the report to the White House counsel's office and members of the president's personal counsel team for their review.
No, I understand. And did the White House then, once they got the report before it went public, did the White House try to weigh in with with your investigation on elements of that report and frankly, get the report changed?
They did request certain edits and changes to the draft report.
Yeah, I see that in the February 5th letter. Did they only correspond with you?
I'm sorry, Congressman, are you asking if they corresponded with anyone else on my team?
Once you gave the report to the White House,
Yes.
they saw changes. I have one letter here that's addressed to you on February 5th, and they said, we're pleased that after more of a year of investigating, you've determined, they respond to the report. And then they disagree with your.
It's so funny because he was appointed
some of the things you had
by
in the report,
Trump.
namely
He's a
the fact that
Republican,
the
but
president's,
because he
memory
didn't charge
was,
Biden,
not very
they're
good.
going to
remember
rake
that?
him over
Yes.
the coals.
Okay, but I also have two other letters.
Sure,
One on
'cause he didn't
February
play ball
7th
like they
from
want-
Merrick Garland, where they
want him
raised the
to.
same concern.
Right.
And then on February 12th, where they go to the DAG. Bradley Weinsheimer. You familiar with those?
I am familiar with those letters. Bradley Weinsheimer is an assistant or associate deputy attorney general.
Right, Associate DAG, the ADAG, right?
Yes.
And Merrick Garland, of course, is the Attorney General. So
Yes,
you're
he
familiar
is.
with the fact that they went over your head?
They were certainly entitled to write whatever letters they wished to Mr. Weinsheimer and to the attorney general.
I just find that interesting. The White House they're communicating with you throughout this one-year investigation, and then the White House says, "Oh, we're going to go to the principal's office, and we're going to talk about Mr. Hur's report." Do you find that interesting?
As I said, they were free to correspond with whomever in the federal government they wished to correspond with. I did engage in numerous communications with them during the course of the investigation, and as is reflected in the special counsel regulations, the Attorney General did provide oversight of my investigation.
Understand. I thank the gentlelady for yielding and yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. I want to first say that the House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to enforce the rule of law. Unfortunately, the actions of this chairman in ignoring a bipartisan congressional subpoena have damaged the ability of this committee to get information from witnesses and damage the rule of law. Now, Mr. Hur, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your compelling immigrant story. That just goes to highlight how America is a nation of immigrants. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, yes and no questions. They are not trick questions. They're simply designed to highlight what you already found in your report, which is that there are, quote, material distinctions, end quote, between President Biden's case and Mr. Trump's case. So here's my first question. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to lie to the FBI?
We identified no such evidence.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to destroy classified documents?
Oh, I know what
No.
he's doing. This is
Did
fantastic.
you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to move boxes of documents to hide them from the FBI?
Oh, such a good
Did you
move.
find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to delete security camera footage after the FBI asked for that footage?
No.
Did you find that President Biden
Yeah,
showed
they're
a
just using
classified
this to
map
expose
related to
Trump.
an ongoing military
Yeah.
operation to a campaign aide who did not have clearance?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that
There it
President
is.
Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
Oh,
No.
Each of the activities I just laid out describe what Donald Trump did in his willful mishandling of classified information and his criminal efforts to deceive the FBI. In contrast, President Biden handed over documents without delay and complied fully with investigators. Mr. Hur, in your report, you write that, quote, according to the indictment, Trump not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it, end quote. You also say that if proven, these would be, quote, serious aggravating facts, end quote. Do you still stand by your analysis?
I do.
I have a few more questions as well. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden
He's
set up a shell
already
company
dead.
and covertly paid $130,000 in hush money to an adult porn star? Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to pay $150,000 in hush money to a former Playboy model?
No.
In your investigation, did you find that President Biden called the Georgia Secretary of State to demand that he, quote, find 11,780 votes?
No.
Did you find that President Biden devised a scheme to organize a slate of fake electors to undermine a free and fair election?
oh,
Did you find that leading up to January 6, 2021, President Biden urged his
You should have
supporters to
mentioned
travel to
hang Mike
D.C. and to
Pence, too.
storm the Capitol?
No.
Thank you. Each of these activities I laid out describe what Donald Trump did, his efforts to bully election officials, overturn the results of the election, and deceive the American people. That is why Donald Trump has been indicted in not just one, not just two, not just three, but 4 criminal cases. I yield back.
If Lou kept counting, MAGA was going to have to take off their shoes so they could keep up.
I just want to go do a little repetition, Mr. Hur, in regards to the chairman's question.
That was
a few minutes
fucking
ago.
brutal.
So is it correct that
Oh my
February 5th
God.
letter that was
how you do it.
sent
Yeah,
to
like,
you asking
this
you
is
to
really, they
change,
were not expecting this this
references
to actually
the
be an
president's poor
opportunity
memory?
just to highlight
Wasn't
Trump's
there a
crime.
request by the White House to do that?
There was a request.
And, Mr. Chairman, I think the record should show that the gentleman from Maryland earlier said that that was not the case. I think he said, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Hur's report. Obviously, Mr. Hur is telling us differently here. And didn't the White House then go to the Attorney General himself and say that he would like to see changes to the references in regards to the president's memory?
The White House counsel did send such a letter.
So if this president was 60 years old rather than 80 years old, would you prosecute him?
Congressman, as I've said before,
If
I cannot
and
engage in
buts were
hypotheticals.
candy
I
and
address the
nuts,
facts and the
every
evidence as I
day
found
be
it.
There was
Christmas.
an 80-year-old grandma that came to Washington, D.C. a few years ago, did not commit a violent crime, committed a crime, but did not commit a violent crime, and she was fully prosecuted.
And if grandma
Doesn't that
had
seem
balls,
like it's
she'd
a
be
dual system
grandpa.
of justice where the president is above the law?
Congressman, I don't know the facts and the details of this other case that you're referencing with this other person.
You say that the president is unlikely to reoffend in the future. I believe that was a quote that you put in the report. Is that
I
correct?
believe that's in Chapter 13.
How so? How is he unlikely to reoffend in the future? How do you come to that judgment?
As I say on page 254, any deterrent effect of prosecution would likely be slight. We are not concerned with specific deterrents, as we see little risk he will reoffend.
Well, isn't it because he's now the president and he has almost unlimited authority to,
No. Just because
to
Trump
release
thinks that
documents? Isn't
way
that
doesn't mean
correct?
everybody
I mean,
else does,
as a vice president,
motherfucker.
he
Like
didn't have
the
that authority.
projection, I
Now
swear
that
to
he's
God,
president,
like if they
isn't it
did it
easy
anymore,
to
you
say
could see it on the
that
moon.
he's unlikely to reoffend because he's got almost unlimited authority to release these documents?
Well, that statement was based on that assessment of the likeliness of reoffending from this particular person, President Biden, is based on a number of factors, including the authority that he has now with respect to classified
How about
materials,
based on the
as
fact
well
that he
as
gave them
the
back as soon as
experience
he
that
was
he's had
asked?
going through a special counsel investigation.
Yeah, but look back at 2011. There were multiple instances where he was informed by his staff and they ratcheted it up to where there was a formal process. You're saying he's learned from that when he's proven that he hasn't? I mean, that goes all the way back to 2011.
Congressman, what I'm saying in the report at page 254 is that
He's a repeat offender, Mr. Hur, isn't he?
what I say.
Let me move on to, I'll move on to something else here. You said he had
Vixen
strong
on Blue
motivations
says,
to
like
ignore the
Katie
proper
Britt, I'd never
procedures for
seen
safeguarding
her
classified
before.
information.
That
And he
speech
provided raw
referring
material
to
to his
never seeing
ghostwriter
this
that would be
gentleman,
of interest to prospective
never seeing her
readers and
before
buyers
her
of his book.
Mommy
And I think he said
Dearest
something about
speech.
he viewed himself as a
Mommy
historical
Dearest is a
figure.
pretty fair, accurate
I believe those
assessment.
words do
Although
all
I would definitely,
And he was also
I would
doing
definitely
this
say
for
more
business
like
purposes,
Sybil starring
that
Sally
there may be people
Field.
that would want to buy his book.
Towards the end of his vice presidency, Mr. Biden had resolved to write a book and began work on it towards the end of his vice presidency.
You know, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really consistent with the Biden family when you look at them in trying to enrich themselves. I mean, you're familiar with the work that the
Or that
Oversight Committee has
Split
done
movie.
over the last year, right?
I have read some reports of it.
I mean, 20 phone calls that were made to his son that he denied in 2019, 20 shell companies that were created, over $20 million. I mean, doesn't it appear there's a pattern here?
Appear.
that where I come from, they almost call it money grubbing.
Congressman, what
You'd
I'm here
know
to
all
testify
about it,
about
motherfucker.
They can't prove any of that shit.
this investigation and in this report.
So I want to thank you for the work that you did as far as you could. But unfortunately, you are part of the Praetorian Guard that guards the swamp out here in Washington, D.C., protecting.
You know what? If he'd have
And
fucking
Joe
charged
Biden
him,
was
he'd
part
be
of that
sucking his
company
dick
of
on
the
live
elites.
television and cupping the balls.
You see it in the things that the Department of Justice has not acted on, Mr. Chairman. I mean, you look at the president's son, who does not have to answer for lying on his Form 4473 in regards to throwing away a weapon. You see it where the Department of Justice fends off the IRS when the whistleblowers come with this information. Now we see it once again.
Oh, so
where a
now they
president
trust the
believes
IRS
he
and
is
the
above law, and
FBI.
there is no
That's
doubt
interesting how that
this
works, yeah?
president does believe he's above the law.
Oh,
I
they're
yield
just
back.
blowing smoke.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, welcome. I also concur, and let me echo what's already been said by my colleagues, that your personal story of being an immigrant, your family immigrants to this country, the way you've contributed to the greatness of this country shows why America is great. The great immigrant story. Thank you for being here, Sam.
Why is his face
First question to you is, you're a Republican?
I am,
Me,
sir.
look like
Does
he's
that
on
stop
something.
you
I'm
from
surprised
a
he's not
thorough and fair investigation?
look like he's eating
I
a pork
certainly hope
chop
not,
off
and
his
I know
shoulder.
not.
Damn.
This story is really proof of the old saying that the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Needs to go to the bathroom to get a little bump.
President Trump and President Biden handled their classified materials differently, wouldn't you say?
We need to take a quick
My report
recess.
includes an assessment of the alleged facts
Yeah,
in
he's
the
like,
pending indictment of former
nice.
President Trump and a
A
comparison
little
to the
pause
facts
for
that
the
we found in this
cause.
case.
But clearly, the handling of these documents was night and day, correct?
Congressman, do you have a specific aspect of the handling of the documents that you have in mind?
Well, you know, President Trump intentionally took classified materials and obstructed justice to ensure that those materials wouldn't be taken from him, and he refused to work with law enforcement. Is that correct?
My report reflects no findings of obstructive conduct on the part of
Let me ask you another question. President Trump has been indicted in the U.S. District Court of Southern Florida on 40 counts related to his possession of classified documents. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact number of counts, but I know that an indictment is pending in that district.
Mr. Hur, you even wrote that after being given a number of chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, President Trump allegedly did oppose. And according to the indictment, he not only refused to return those documents over for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and lie about them.
Such
Compare and
as
contrasting with President Trump.
worker number 5
President
on
Trump turned
CNN's
classified
interview.
documents over to the National
flooding
Archives
his own
and the
security
Department of
office.
Justice.
I know they were
And he
talking about flooding the zone,
consented
but I
to
didn't know that's what
searching
they meant.
his home and other
In
locations.
case you needed some
Wouldn't you say
reading
that's
material
night
while
and
you're
day when
trying
it
to
comes
take
to
a shit, there's
cooperation
plenty
with
of
law
boxes
enforcement?
in there for it to go.
Congressman, the report does
He has
include
diapers for
analysis
that.
and a comparison of the facts that are alleged with respect to former President Trump, and does detail steps of cooperation that the president and his team took with respect to my investigation.
I would say, President Biden, you had his full cooperation in this investigation.
The report includes cooperative steps that the president took.
Would this be a factor in your decision to prosecute?
It was a factor, and I explained it as such in the report, Congressman.
And you stated that the recommendation not to prosecute had nothing to do with the Department of Justice policy not to indict the sitting president. Is that correct?
What the report says that even if it were not current Department of Justice policy that a sitting president may not be indicted on federal crimes, I would reach the same conclusion that criminal charges are not warranted.
Mr. Hur, have you set new precedent here today?
To the extent that the Department of Justice makes enforcement decisions or non-enforcement decisions in particular cases, those are precedents, those are events that future prosecutors do look to in an endeavor to make sure that federal law is applied consistently over time.
Mr. Hur, I'd say based on your education and your career experience, you're a very, very competent prosecutor, a very, very well-prepared attorney. I'm going to ask you one more time. Does the fact that you're a Republican, does that stop you from a thorough and fair investigation?
No, partisan politics had nothing to do with the work that I did or the report that I wrote or the decision that I reached.
Thank you very much for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
There you have.
Back, gentleman from Wisconsin's recognized.
Attorney Hur,
poor Jean.
Webster's dictionary defines senile as exhibiting a decline of
There you
cognitive
have it,
ability,
kids.
such as memory associated with
It's
old
like every
age.
single time it
Mr.
goes
Hur,
over the
based on your
Democrats, they're
report,
like,
did you find that the
so are we
president
going to
was senile?
either show how
I did
Trump
not-
is a
that
crime
conclusion does not appear in my
boss,
report, Congressman.
or are we going to show how you
felt, though, that the
fudged the
president's
report?
memory or lack
while the
thereof was a
Republicans get
critical
you to
reason
try to
to
admit
decline
things
prosecution.
that you decided not to
The
put
reason
in
I'm
your
asking
report.
this is whether you
This is
believe the
really
president
not a good day
would
for
be
not
fit
only
to
Robert
stand
Hur, but the
trial,
Republicans.
or do you
Whereas
think
it's a
his lawyers
great
would
day for
argue his
Democrats
incompetence
because
to
I'm pretty
stand
sure like
trial
all of them have
due
eaten
to
Rachel
his
Bidikofer's book.
state of mind? Also,
I think
you know,
the staffers are probably
was he
assigned
in
to
a,
read
in a
it.
place to actually be questioned?
Like, this dude's trying to get him to diagnose
Congressman,
Biden.
my report,
apparently.
to the extent that it addresses
Yeah, I mean, this dude's not a
the
freaking
president's memory
doctor.
gaps that we identified in the evidence that we obtained during our investigation, they are addressed in the context of determining how the jury would perceive, receive, and consider evidence relating to whether or not the president had willful intent when it came to retaining or disclosing national defense
That's the
information.
motherfucking difference between Biden and Trump.
Very good. I'd
Willful
like to focus my
intent.
questioning on Chapter 14 of your report. The classified documents found at the Penn Biden Center. You state in your report that the documents found at the Penn Biden Center were the most highly classified, sensitive, and compartmentalized materials recovered during your investigation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Many of the documents came from Mr. Biden's West Wing office. That's also correct, isn't it?
I believe that is reflected in the report.
Did you ask if he had packed the boxes himself?
I believe that was one of the questions that we asked, and that is reflected in the transcript now available to the committee.
I think it's important. How would you characterize the packing of these boxes? Was it slow and meticulous, or were they packed in haste without much scrutiny at all?
I don't recall off the top of my head exactly how he characterized it, but I think the gist of the evidence is that the manner in which files were packed up and moved out at the end of the Obama administration was it was in something of a rushed manner.
Very good. According to your report, the boxes were moved between
They were
multiple
administration
offices
documents
between
then.
Mr. Biden
Administration documents
departing his
are not
West Wing
SCI.
office in January
Well,
of
the
17.
really funny thing is he
and
took
his
all that
arrival
extra
at the
time
Penn
not
Biden
letting
Center's
Biden's
permanent
administration
offices
move in
October of
properly
17.
and transition
Were
the
any
way
of
they were
these
supposed to.
offices
But yeah, he
authorized to
still
store
last
classified
minute had to
information?
fucking
No.
stuff golf pants in
When the
with
boxes
nuclear
finally
secrets.
arrived at the
Really?
Penn Biden Center's permanent offices, how were they stored?
He's an idiot. He's unorganized.
I believe when the
Naturally.
materials were recovered, some of them were stored in a storage closet, and I believe others of them were in file cabinet drawers.
So
But
what's your
but I would refer you
assessment?
to the report.
What's your assessment on security and access control measures at the Penn Biden Center?
That was something that we looked at. There were some security access controls at the Penn Biden Center, but we did get a handle on people who had access to the office space during the time period when we believed the materials were there. And there were other people, including students and some foreign dignitaries, that visited that facility at the time.
Very good. You anticipated my next question. So when the boxes were discovered to have classified documents more than 5 years later, who discovered these boxes? It was Patrick Moore. Is that correct?
Correct. One of the president's personal counsel.
And did Mr. Moore have some type of active security clearance at the time?
No.
How about the executive assistant at the Penn Biden Center?
No.
On page 265 of your
Actually,
report.
I'm sorry, Congressman, I may have misspoken there. I am not certain whether or not that executive assistant had an active security clearance at the time.
Very good. On page 265 of your report, you stated, when interviewed by FBI agents, Moore believed the small closet was initially locked and that the Penn Biden Center staff member provided a key to unlock it, but his memory was fuzzy on that point. But an interview with Mr. Biden's executive assistant seemed to contradict his statement. Do you remember this exchange, and did in fact it contradict each other?
Sir, you're asking if I remember the exchange with Mr. Moore during our interview with him?
Right. Do you remember them contradicting each other?
I don't remember that contradiction specifically, but generally during the interview, sometimes we heard things from some witnesses that were in tension with what we heard from other witnesses, and we did our best to resolve those those conflicts.
Just very quickly, in total, the National Archives discovered 9 documents totaling 44 pages with classification markings. Is that correct?
From the Penn Biden Center, yes.
And you declined charges because in summarizing your analysis, you couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
You know,
that
these guys
retention of
don't
the
realize
documents
how
was
stupid
willful.
all of
Correct,
this
sir.
makes them
Very
look.
good. I yield back.
Oh
Gentleman yields
yeah,
back.
I mean,
Gentlelady from
it's
Pennsylvania's recognized.
just because
Thank you, Mr. Hur,
when
for your
you
testimony today.
everything's built on a house of cards, the
with
moment
all
that
the
the table
posturing that
will
we've
get
heard
shaken
thus
one
far
time,
this
it all
morning,
falls.
I think it's important that we refocus and remember the conclusion that you reached on the first page and in the very first sentence of your report, which
Here we
was,
go.
we conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. Did I read that accurately?
You did, Congresswoman.
And there it is.
Your report also says,
Yeah.
in addition to this shortage
They're all
of
gonna
evidence,
do this.
there are
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
innocent explanations for the
Y'all wanted
documents that have
sound
not been-
bites?
that
We'll
we've
give you
not been
fucking
able to
sound
refute.
bites.
Did I read that correctly?
No, it's actually
Congresswoman,
brilliant.
if you would give me a page
Oh, yeah.
citation.
Because
Page
the Republicans
6.
spend their whole time building a house of cards,
Mhm,
and then they just
yeah.
go over there and just pink, bye-bye.
Yeah, they just, fucking
Yes, I see that language
accidentally
on page
bump
6.
one of the
Okay,
table
thank
legs
you.
walking
Now,
by
in
because
addition
one of
to
them
those
has big
conclusions, your
feet.
report
And that's
details
it.
several material distinctions, as you called them,
Story of my
between
life.
President Biden's actions and former
Big
President
shoes.
Trump's mishandling of classified materials. The facts are that President Biden cooperated with your investigation. Is that correct?
He did.
And his team notified authorities when they discovered classified documents, and he turned them over immediately. Is that correct?
Yes,
He consented to multiple searches of his home and other properties. Is that correct?
correct,
And he voluntarily sat for an interview with you. Is that correct?
correct.
But when it comes to Mr. Trump's treatment of classified materials, your report states that according to the criminal indictment against him, he refused to return classified documents in his possession for many months despite having multiple chances to do so.
You know, I'm curious
And he
he
obstructed
perjured
justice by
himself.
enlisting others to destroy evidence and lie about it. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, you noted in your testimony that the
I
specific
know he
comments
did
you made about
yesterday.
President Biden's memory.
Yeah, I was fixing to say, I thought he did
And as we've
perjure
seen
himself.
today, our Republican
He said he
colleagues are
wasn't a
again and
member of the
again trying
Federalist
to
Society.
weaponize
I
those
posted
comments
his,
in a cheap attempt to
bio
score
on their
political points.
website
But
to hear.
as someone who's participated in
Yeah, he
trials,
is a
you know
member.
that witnesses, regardless of age,
Uh-oh.
often have difficulty recalling specific statements or facts when asked about them many years after those facts. So let's take a quick look at a differing witness experiencing a lapse in memory during the deposition.
Your next
they're gonna
wife
play
was a
again,
woman by the name of
yes.
Marla Maples,
Right.
and sitting here today, do you recall what years you were married to Ms. Maples?
I'd have to get the exact dates for you. I can do that.
Am I correct that you married your current wife in January 2005?
I don't know relative to that tape.
And what years were you the owner of the Plaza Hotel?
I don't know.
He
these.
doesn't even know
James
when he
Webb.
got married.
I don't remember the names. Don't remember the name.
So you don't remember saying you have one of the best memories?
I don't remember that.
God
I
damn.
remember you telling me. But, I don't know that I.
Women
Thank
person
God that
camera
bitch
today.
said
So I
she'd
would
be
also add that
mad.
Mr. Trump told lawyers, I don't remember 35 times in his deposition for a lawsuit over Trump University. And in response to questions from special counsel
think
Robert
Melania
Mueller,
has
he
more to be
answered,
pissed about
did
than
not
him not
remember or
remembering their
could not
anniversary.
recall 27 times. Now, Mr. Hur, you've said today that DOJ
Yeah, I saw the
processing
video of
regulations
him
required
dissing
you
his
to
grandson
assess
in front of
whether
Ivanka
a
the other
jury
day.
would find Mr. Biden to be a credible witness,
She looked
correct?
pissed too. She was like,
I'm not sure that I said those words exactly.
Trump
but
University is
of
the
course,
safety school for
in
people
my
that couldn't
view,
get into
how a jury would
PragerU.
perceive Mr. Biden if he elected to testify in his own defense at a trial. That would be part of the whole ball of wax that jurors would consider in determining whether he had willful intent in retaining or disclosing national defense information.
Sure. Do you have any reason to believe that the special counsel who investigated and charged Mr. Trump with willful retention of classified documents would have failed to make an assessment of whether the jury would find Mr. Trump to be a credible witness?
I don't have any information relating to I'm not qualified basically to answer that question as to what went into Mr. Smith's decision-making.
But you are qualified to say what are the normal procedures followed by a special counsel, correct?
I'm familiar with the rules as set forth in the Justice Manual and my understanding of how to apply them.
And in fact, what you did.
Correct.
Okay. So I would suggest that we can all assume that the fact that Mr. Trump was charged with multiple counts of willfully concealing classified documents suggests that the special counsel in that case determined that Mr. Trump's denials are not credible. At this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an excerpt from the committee's transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antonio, former Assistant Director in charge of the FBI Washington Field Office on July 7th, 2023, in which he explained the urgency for the FBI to retrieve and secure classified documents from Donald Trump's estate because they contain
Before he
national
sells
security
them to
information
somebody
that
for
should
a
not be viewed
20-piece
by anyone
McNugget.
without the proper security clearance. Even Mr. D'Antonio himself
For
could
like,
not view the
say,
documents
$91 million.
given their high security clearance, despite being the assistant director in charge of the FBI Washington Field Office. Thank you. I
Without
yield
objection,
back.
General Lady yields back. Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was quite interested in the dates that are set forth in your report, Mr. Hur. And the reason I'm interested is because I keep getting confused between the 2017 date and the 2024 date as to the condition of the president's memory. And so was there a difference? Because when I look at it, it seems like his memory was bad in 2017, and then it was bad today. But there's never any distinction made. But isn't it true that if you were going to be looking at at prosecuting as you were, you would look carefully at his condition in 2017? Isn't that the proper time? Because I think you say in your report that the most
Captain
your
Terp
best
says
case, I think you
Biden
call
went
it out,
above and beyond, yet
the best case
somehow
for
the
charges would
narrative
rely on Mr. Biden's
state
possession
says
of Afghanistan
otherwise.
documents in his Virginia home in February 2017 when he was a private citizen and when he told his
Vixen on
ghostwriter he just
Blue
found classified material.
Says,
That's the best
yep,
case as you say it.
just like Biden
And then
did.
you work your way through a series of defenses against your best case. So you were looking at his condition in 2017. Do I have that right?
You do, Congressman.
And his memory was bad then. We can draw our conclusions whether it improved over the next 6 years or not. But I just want to make sure it's clear that we're looking at his condition in 2017, which you then find as you go through the list of defenses.
Theron says that's all they have to hang their hat on is Biden's age.
His memory is bad. There's
That
about
and that
6 or 7
one quote
defenses
that
here.
they took that
And so
the
where it
transcript
gets me to is this
completely
question.
blew out of the water.
And I actually pulled this quote out of
The thing is
I
that
read
there's not
this morning.
much
That
different
perhaps your
in their
report
ages.
concluded,
Trump
and
and
perhaps it did
Biden,
not,
4 years.
that the president is, quote, incapable of being held accountable. But that's not quite what happened, is it? You didn't find that he was incapable of being held accountable, did you?
I did not. Those
did
words
not.
do not
Oh,
appear
you
in
mean
my
the president
They
has
do not.
immunity?
But you reached a
Wait a
conclusion
minute,
that
hold
you
on.
didn't have the evidence, but then your report
Wait just a
continually
second.
recites these
Did
defenses.
this guy
I'm
just
having
like
a hard time
borrow
putting it
his
together.
hair from
If you
Newt Gingrich, like Mr.
didn't
Potato
have the
Head
evidence,
style?
Why do you persist in reciting these defenses?
Radio dude.
Congressman,
Like,
I
Just
wrote my
plucked it off
report
of
as
Newt
an
Gingrich and
explanation
placed it
of my
gingerly
decision
on top
to decline
of
charges
Senator
as to President
Cucknuckle.
Biden. And the way that I came up with that explanation and wrote it in my report for the Attorney General is the following. The approach that I took was a prosecutor envisioning what would be the probable outcome of trial if we charged this case, if we presented the evidence to a jury, and not only the government presenting the evidence to a jury, but what would happen if the defense lawyers also got a chance to try to poke holes in the government's case at trial. And with respect to one of the several potential defenses that I lay out in the report, one of them does focus on the president's memory-related issues. That is a defense that the president's defense lawyers may well present at trial. And a jury is going to be confronted with at least 3 separate sets of evidence relating to the president's memory. One is from the recordings in 2016 and 2017 from the ghostwriter.
But if I may, forgive me for interrupting, but I'm limited on time as everybody else was. But you say, I think, that the evidence
Theron says they all go to the
suggests
same Capitol
he is
barber who
incapable
burns
of
the
proving, or
hair
you're
instead of
incapable of
cutting
proving,
it. Well, they had to learn how
intent.
the proper
There's
haircut
kind
to
of a
hide
bit
the
of a difference there.
horns.
Right? You may well have had the intent, but you could not
They're Sith. They cut their hair with a lightsaber.
holding these documents. And I hate to say hiding the documents, but you couldn't prove it. So what you did instead is fell back to the various defenses that might also be asserted against.
If you're a
Singe a
Republican
little off the
staffer,
top.
you're only
of
allowed to get your
rationale
hair
for
cut
not
with a
pursuing the
Flowbee
president.
because they're all
Is that-
masochists.
Do I have it right now?
Congressman, I think we're on the same page. I think what I'm trying to convey
That's
is
why
the
they-
way that prosecutors assess the strengths and weaknesses of their case is to think through, hey, in the government's case in chief, here's the evidence we're gonna present, and the jury might be with us.
Maybe
But that's not the end of the trial. The
I
trial
have the
also has to
congressman,
include presentation from the defense.
When you
lawyer.
order
You're
Newt
correct in
Gingrich off of
lawyer
Wish.
tried cases, so I get it. Your report is not an exoneration
Or
so much
Timu.
as a determination that the evidence as you saw it would not overcome the defenses that you had identified, plus whatever lack of evidence you
Looks like
received.
instead of cutting his hair
So
around
it's
a
not an
bowl, he
exoneration,
used
is
like
it?
a motorcycle
The
helmet.
word exoneration does not appear anywhere in my
Timu
report, and that is not
Gingrich.
my conclusion.
The other thing that's of interest, and I think you were misquoted. You said something about, or someone, I think it was Mr. Raskin, suggested that you. Well, I'm going to run out of time, but I appreciate the work you do as a prosecutor, and I yield back.
Faint because my hair
Gentleman
is
yields
so
back. Mr. Hur,
heavy.
we've been at this close to 3 hours. We will, if you can hang with us, we'd like to keep going. There's a chance we could complete votes by the time we have to go to votes on the House floor, which would be about 1:40.
I can keep going, Chairman.
Okay, then we'll try to do that. There's a chance we may not too, but I just wanted you to know the lay of the land. Now yield to the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Hur, for your
Oh,
testimony
Nagoose,
and
hell yeah.
for your service as a prosecutor at the
This
Department
is
of
my
Justice.
rap.
I want to focus a bit more on the progress of
Dude
the
throws
investigation,
punches.
kind of some process questions.
He just got up and left. He had to
You were
go
appointed by Attorney General
take
Garland,
care of his hair.
a special counsel to
He's a
investigate the
veteran.
president's handling
He
of classified
knows how to do
documents
shit.
in January of 2023. Correct?
Correct.
And Attorney General Garland, of course, as you know, was nominated by President Biden to serve in his role.
Correct.
During your 15-month investigation, did the Attorney General attempt to interfere with your investigation?
No.
Did he impede your investigation in any way?
No.
Did any other member of the Department of Justice or within the administration refuse to cooperate with your investigation?
No.
Were you ever denied access to materials, witnesses, resources from Attorney General Garland that you might have needed during the investigation?
No.
You submitted, I think this is right, your final report to Attorney General Garland on February 5th of 2024.
Correct.
Right, okay. And it was then released publicly 3 days later, on February 8th.
I love it. There's a strategy by the
2024, is that right?
Dems where
I believe
one
that's true,
person
yes.
asks him all questions where he
In
has
the
to answer
final
yes.
report that was
Another Dem
released, were
asks
any
him
of
questions
your
where he has to answer
substantive
all
findings
no.
redacted or changed in any way?
No.
None of your findings were modified by
Yeah,
the
Nagoose
Attorney
is
General?
also an attorney,
No.
so.
Did the Attorney General issue any kind of statement or a letter attempting to describe the contents of your report?
No.
Okay. You're familiar, I know, I'm sure, with the investigation that was conducted by Special Counsel Mueller years ago with respect to the former president.
Yes.
And at that time, Attorney General Barr was in charge of the Justice Department. He sat where you sat in this committee. I remember it well, just a few short years ago, testifying on the nature of that particular investigation. Are you familiar with the way in which he released that report and characterized it?
Yes.
Okay. Very different from the way that Attorney General Garland conducted this particular release. I take it you'd agree with that.
They were not the same approach.
Not the same approach, right? In the case of Attorney General Garland, no impeding or interfering with your investigation in any way whatsoever, releasing the report in full to the American public, not attempting to mischaracterize it or describe it in any way. Dissimilar from Attorney General Barr, who 5 years ago, as you recall, after Special Counsel Mueller submitted his report to the Department of Justice, took nearly a month to release the report to the American public, heavily redacted, and not before
Heavily
he had issued a
redacted.
letter
The
of his own
motherfucker looked like a tire
to the
skid
leaders
mark.
of the Senate and House Judiciary Committees, mischaracterizing the contents of that report. That distinction and difference is very important because from your testimony, at least from what I gleaned from your testimony, is that Attorney General Garland acted appropriately and ethically with respect to this investigation. I take it you agree.
Attorney General Garland did not interfere with my efforts, and I was able to conduct a fair, thorough, and independent investigation.
Very different approach, as you said, from the way in which the Department of Justice, unfortunately, tragically, functioned under the former president. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes. Would the gentleman yield for 10 seconds? Gentleman from
Didn't they throw Michael Cohen and Buck in prison
Colorado's last
last
point,
I
there was
checked?
one big difference.
And then put him in
Bill Barr
solitary when he
didn't
said he's
name
going to
Bob
write a
Mueller as
book?
special counsel.
Pretty sure it did.
Bob Mueller was named by Rod Rosenstein. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
in how this whole thing works. I now yield back to the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hur, in your report, you cited principles of federal prosecution and observed that, and I quote, historically, after leaving office, many former presidents and vice presidents have knowingly taken home sensitive materials related to national security for their administrations without being charged with crimes. And this historical record is important context for judging whether or why to charge a former vice president or former president,
He
unquote.
already said
Why is examining
he's
this
not
history so
going
important?
to charge.
Congressman, one of the reasons that it was important was because it would bear on how a jury would perceive,
All they're doing is just asking to
how
be
a jury would
explained
decide whether or not
why.
criminal willful intent
Like
was formed by the person obtaining
they're
or
fucking
disclosing the national
masochists at
defense
this point.
information at issue.
Has there been an exception to this in the history of the nation? Have we charged any former presidents?
As I state in the report, to my knowledge, there is only one exception, and that is former President Trump.
What it is,
Given the
is
history,
they can't
is it
get
fair to
what
say
they
it's
want, so
preferable
they're
not to
trying
charge
every
a former
angle to
president
get it.
or a vice president
Or
for
at least to
allegedly
muddy up the
mishandling
fucking
classified
waters for
documents,
the
in your opinion?
voters. Vixen on Blue
Congressman,
said
I
he
can't
was
articulate a
released,
preference,
referring to Michael
whether it's
Cohen, to
preferable.
home
All I can talk
confinement
about
during
is the work that I
COVID.
did, the
Trump
facts that
found
I
out,
found,
called
and the
Barr,
decision
and
that I
made him
reached
take
in my
Cohen
case.
back to jail.
Mr. Hur, what's the
So when
difference
they're
in a
sitting there
U.S. senator
talking
having
about the
documents
Department of
and a former
Justice being
president of the United
weaponized, it
States?
sounds pretty fucking weaponized to me.
For purposes of proving
It was during
willfulness,
Trump years.
I believe that there would be
Yes, absolutely.
a number of
They
differences
remanded
in
him
terms
back
of
to
the
custody
types of
because he
access
wouldn't
and the
agree
ease with
to
which
silence, basically.
presidents, while in office, can access classified information as compared to the access privileges that senators have.
Can presidents declassify documents that they have in their possession?
I believe under certain circumstances, yes.
Former presidents as well?
I confess I'm not. This is an
son!
area of law work that is reflected in the report.
Well, let me say this, sir. You have a reputation beyond reproach, and I just want you to know that. And I think that President Biden is thankful that the Attorney General appointed you to investigate his case. But you have a special counsel
That was a
colleague by the name of Jack
Republican that
Smith
asked
who
that
cannot lay
question.
claim to such a reputation. Isn't that right?
I have no opinion.
I'm amazed the chat
fact,
didn't
Jack
just,
Smith, whom Biden
I'm amazed the
Justice
chat
Attorney
didn't just
General
light up with just
Garland
burnt
appointed as Trump has
simultaneously.
a reputation, according to deep-rooted reporting from the Washington Times, as an overzealous prosecutor who relies
Why would you
ethically
ask that
on
question
ethically
if you
dubious
don't want the
tactics.
answer?
Unquote.
You
And his
dumb
prosecutorial
fuck.
record
Because
is
they're
replete
fucking
with a quote
stupid.
of- and I'm
Like,
with a
did y'all
quote, let me say
even
this,
read
string of mistrials and
the report
overturned
where y'all
convictions.
decided to come
Actually,
in and
Chief
ask
Justice
questions?
Roberts once rebuked Mr. Smith's
Yes, sir. May I have
prosecutorial
another? Yes,
theory
sir. May I
as a
have
balanced
another? Yes, sir.
interpretation
May
of
I
the
have
federal robbery
another?
statute.
Yeah.
That did not comport with the text of the statute or the precedent of this court, according to the Supreme Court Justice. And so, my question is, do you think in the case of Jack Smith, do you think justice is blind when he's looking at President Trump? Since we've never done this in the history of the country, is justice truly blind?
Sir, I'm not here to express any opinion. Other defendant, I'm here to talk about the work that I did with respect to the investigation relating to President Biden.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield the balance of my time back to you.
Turn your microphone on, dipshit.
Ask.
Actually, don't.
I know, right? I don't want to hear it.
To this conclusion.
Hear you yelling about nothing.
Congressman Jordan, I'm sorry, but the mic was turned on partway through your
Can you explain what specifically in your interview with President Biden led you to this conclusion?
The conclusion
That
about
broad
how
statement that's been
Oh,
cited many times.
welcome. Songs about rainbows.
the totality
Here for the snark.
of the time that I spent with the president during his voluntary
Do
interview,
what to Eileen
was something
and
that I
where?
certainly considered in framing my assessment.
Said her name was
of
Eileen,
the
so I would
report.
think.
I'm
That
sure
includes not
that
only
she's
the
about
words
as tired of that as
record
I
of the
am.
transcript of the
Fucking
interview,
Gilligan's
but also the
Island
experience
jokes
of
and
being
peanut
there in the
butter
room with him
jokes and Barbie's little
frankly
sister
considering
jokes.
how he would present to a jury
That is such
in a
a
criminal
good
trial
song.
if charges were brought.
But I guess I'm asking specifically. I know you cite in the report the dates that he couldn't remember when he was vice president, when he began, when his term ended. You cite that in the report.
Dexys
Is there
Midnight
anything else
Runners.
specifically that stands
Yes.
out from that interview with the president?
Such a bop.
A number of things stand out. And again, I'm aware that the transcript has
Safety
now been
dance.
made available.
No, you invited people over from
I do
Discord,
provide
Sarah. That's
certain
cool.
examples in my report of
Well, I mean, we're
significant
going to be raiding out from here to
personally
Tony's
painful experiences about which the president was unable to recall
Twitch
certain
anyway.
information. I also took into account the president's overall demeanor in interacting with me during the 5+ hour voluntary interview. So it was a wealth of details about being there in the moment with the president, including his inability to recall certain things.
Welcome,
and I'll also say, as
Shelabram,
reflected in the transcript,
1963.
the fact that he was prompted on numerous occasions by the members of the White House
I
counsel's
read
office.
that, the brief look I had at the
Welcome,
transcript this morning.
ML.
We just got it this morning. I saw some of that. Chair now recognize the gentlelady from.
The dive bar of democracy is shown up. If y'all have any questions about that,
From Pennsylvania.
I got an upgrade.
I would recommend sticking around.
Thank you, Mr. Hur.
because
Thank you, Chairman.
Tony might
Thank
talk
you, Mr. Hur, for your service to our country,
something,
for your team's
just something
service
about
in
those
this,
words that I just
investigation.
mentioned.
You
We'll see what's
determined,
up.
after what you described as rigorous, detailed, and thorough analysis, that President Biden should not be prosecuted for mishandling classified documents. In fact, everybody can take a look at your report. The very first sentence says as much. It says, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." Am I correct?
Yes,
That's the bottom line of this report. Am I
God
correct?
damn.
that is the
God damn.
It's the first sentence and the bottom line. There's an awful lot of misinformation that has been put forward by the press in some cases and also by the other side of this dais. You didn't reach this decision because President Biden was sympathetic. Is that correct?
I reached the decision based on the totality of the reasons that I set forth at length in my report.
Based on the evidence. And while Mr. Trump, who is being prosecuted, is not sympathetic, you didn't calibrate any of that in there. Sympathetic, not sympathetic. Doesn't matter. It's the evidence, right?
Congresswoman, I did not reach any assessments of the evidence in the Trump matter. To the extent that I considered the allegations against former President Trump, it was for purposes of comparing relevant
trust
precedents.
that with your credibility, you were not out to get Mr. Trump nor here to help Mr. Biden. I think it's about the evidence, and I think you say that over and over again in your report. Why did you decide President Biden should not be prosecuted? Your report tells us, quote, "We conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict."
Here it comes.
Those are your words. Is that correct?
I believe if those exact words do not appear in the report, that is consistent with the gist of my conclusion.
Very good. Your exact words. That was not the case with Donald Trump. You have a copy of your report today, don't you, in front of you?
I do.
Would you read a portion of it for me? Your words, it is page 11, starting on line 3, beginning with the words, "Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden." Would you read the next few sentences?
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set
Oh, make
forth
him
in the
read it.
indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Keep going.
According to the indictment, he not only refused
Yeah,
to return the
just keep
documents for many
prodding
months,
him on
but he
like a
also
racehorse.
obstructed justice by enlisting
Keep
others
reading
to
your own
destroy
shit.
evidence and
Let's
then
go.
lie about it.
You may stop there.
Breathe
Thank
deep,
you. You mentioned the
motherfucker.
indictment against Mr. Trump for mishandling sensitive, classified national security information. That indictment says at the end of his presidency, Mr. Trump, I'm looking for my indictment here. I have it here. Hang on.
He just got a manicure. He
Just
doesn't-
let me get my pocket indictment out. Hold
Himself
on.
ordered that boxes containing classified materials go to Mar-a-Lago, where he hosted tens of thousands of guests. Then he kept these sensitive materials carelessly about the property, as you can see here. Classified documents ended up in a bathroom, a ballroom, on a floor, spewing about. And when a grand jury subpoenaed the documents, what did Donald
It's a
Trump
shitter,
do?
not a
The
bathroom.
indictment again shows against him what he responded by, suggesting that his attorney falsely represent that the FBI and grand jury that he did not have documents called for by the subpoena. He directed his employee, Waltine Nauta, to move boxes of the documents to conceal them from Mr. Trump's attorney, and then lied to his attorney and the
bunch of
FBI
lies.
and the grand jury, suggesting his attorney might hide or destroy documents called for by the grand jury investigation. Mr. Hur, are those the type of aggravating facts to which you refer to in your report?
Congresswoman, the aggravating facts that I refer to in the report are set forth and described in my report at page 11.
Very good.
Mr. Hur, to the best of your knowledge and investigation, did President Biden ever direct an employee to lie about, hide, or destroy classified information? Yes or no?
We did not identify such evidence.
Did he do so himself?
We did not identify such evidence.
And I want to give you a chance, since the transcript is out, to correct the record on an important point. Very sadly, your report on page 208 says that Mr. Biden couldn't come up with the date, the year of his son, Beau Biden's death, when in fact in the transcript it shows that you asked him the month. And do you know what he said, Mr. Hur? He said, oh God, May 30th. Would you like to correct the record? His memory was pretty firm on the month and the day.
Congresswoman, I don't believe that's correct with respect to the transcript, but if you could refer me to a specific page, I'd be happy to look.
Correct.
What it says in there.
Thank you.
Page
says.
82. It is on page
Chair
82
now
and
recognizes
83.
Mr.
It is
Counsel.
What it
absolutely
says.
correct.
Mr. Hur, why did the
It
White
said,
House
"Oh
ask you to
God,
remove
May."
parts of the report? What was the reason they gave for that?
I don't have the letter in front of me, Congressman.
It
I
misrepresented
believe that among the
Yep.
reasons was that they contested or that they asserted that certain language in the report was inconsistent with DOJ policy.
The day that your report came out, the president gave a live news conference on national television. Did you watch that news conference?
I watched the press conference, yes.
What
Oh
was your reaction
my
to seeing the president
lord!
personally attack you and
Like,
your team?
Congressman, I'm here to talk
said he
about
couldn't.
the work that went into
That's
the report
perjury.
and my
How's that not
declaration
perjury?
and my explanation of it for the attorney.
And it wasn't just the president.
Someone tell me.
Anthony Coley,
In chat,
former spokesman
how's
for
this not
Merrick
perjury?
Garland, has said that Democrats should focus their ire
Because he's a
on
prosecutor.
Hur. The president's personal attorney, Bob Bauer, said that your report is a shabby piece of work and a shoddy work product. Do you agree with that characterization of your report?
I disagree vehemently with that characterization of my report.
I also disagree. I think it's very well written, well considered,
Your work sucks.
and comprehensive. Do you think it's appropriate for the administration to be attacking the work of a special counsel that it appointed itself?
Congressman, I'm not going to comment on the propriety of the administration's reaction to my report. What I can tell you is that I stand by the report and the work that went into it.
Today, the ranking member started his opening statement by saying, Mr. Hur completely exonerated President Biden.
Theron,
And called
I'm
him
quit my
no
job the
country.
day before
I
I
might
saw
just
it.
be a
Hur, did
backwoods
you
country.
completely
Oh
exonerate
yeah.
President Biden?
That is not what my
Oh,
report
gosh.
says.
Was your report a total and complete exoneration?
That is not what the report says.
So the statement by the ranking member was incorrect, yes?
As I said, the report is not an exoneration. That word does not appear in my report.
Based on the facts and anticipation of defenses
okay,
presented in your
then
report,
when
could a
somebody
reasonable juror have
is
voted to
not
convict?
found to be guilty,
As I said, in the
they
report,
are,
some
say it
reasonable
with
jurors
me,
may have
chat,
reached the inferences that the government represented in
exonerated.
its case in chief at
So a
trial.
reasonable juror could have
Anti-guilty.
voted to convict based on the facts.
Anti-guilty, correct.
You were on the jury, would you have voted to convict?
I have not engaged in that thought exercise, Congressman, and so what I'd like to stick to is what's in the report, which is my assessment as a prosecutor.
Sure. And what you did find in the report
I'm trying to
is that
see the
president,
nameplate.
says page 200, risks
Senator
serious
Fuck
damage
Knuckle
to
or something
America's
like that.
national
Mr.
security.
Kelly
Who is
or
handling
Kylie,
and mishandling
K-I-L-E-Y.
classified materials. And you identify,
Kelly.
quote, a strong motive for the way he handled those materials.
Where is
Two of
he
the motives
from?
you
Let me
cited
look
was
him
his
up.
desire to run for president and his desire to sell books. So a reasonable inference for your report is that the president risked serious damage to America's national security in order to make money and advance his personal political ambitions. Is that correct?
The report includes a description of the evidence and
No.
different inferences that researchers could
No.
draw from the evidence.
And you also
Wow.
note that the president described his predecessor's handling of classified materials as totally irresponsible.
He's only 39,
And your
he
report
looks like crap.
concludes that Mr. Biden's emphatic and unqualified conclusion that keeping marked classified documents unsecured in one's home is totally irresponsible
Not wearing
applies
the
equally to
classic
his own decision.
Trump
Is that
costume.
correct?
That language does appear in the report.
You cite as a mitigating factor the fact that the president cooperated in the investigation. But at the time that the investigation was happening and these acts of cooperation occurred, the Mar-a-Lago investigation was already a matter of public record, correct?
I believe that's correct.
So we already had a public debate about the handling of classified documents and the potential application of the criminal laws to that general set of circumstances.
I think that's fair.
And so the president, when he decided to cooperate or not cooperate, had to know that that decision to cooperate or not cooperate would become known to the public, and he would be judged accordingly. Is that correct?
I'm not in a position to opine on what was or was not.
He wants that soundbite so bad. He wants it so bad.
He knew that he was going to have to be judged based on whether he cooperated or not. That would lessen its value as a mitigating factor. So did that, in your analysis, lessen its value?
We undertook a comprehensive.
You see, the Democrats can do this play yes or no game because they have the facts on their side. These guys are trying to get him to say yes or no to their fabricated horse
Another
shit.
factor you discussed is a deterrence.
And he's not going to perjure himself. He's not going to do it. He's not going to fucking perjure himself.
Because you said, as for general deterrence, future presidents and vice presidents are already likely to be deterred by
Basically,
the
his
multiple
logic
recent criminal
is like,
investigations
oh,
and one
isn't
prosecution
it
of
suspicious
current and former
that Biden
president and vice
didn't commit
presidents
any
for
crimes,
mishandling
so he wouldn't
classified
be
documents. So
charged?
that one prosecution, of course, is the indictment brought by Jack Smith. So
Vixen
by
on
the very
Blue says
terms
he
of
won't
your
further
analysis,
perjure
Jack
himself.
Smith's
Yeah, fair
indictment was
dues.
actually
Fair
counseled
dues.
against and was counted against bringing charges in this case. Is that correct?
Doing a good job of it
I'm
now.
sorry, Congressman, I don't follow your drift there.
Well, you said that there's already deterrence because there's this prosecution out there in a prior case related to classified documents. So we don't need to bring another case to establish deterrent value. That was the essence of your analysis, correct?
Congressman, what I'll say is that I will stand by the way and the specific words in which I characterize my assessment of deterrence value of a case under the principles of federal prosecution that's on page 254 and 255 of my report.
Thank you. My time is out, but I'll just add the perverse implication here is that the administration, by the very terms of your analysis, actually made it less likely that the president would face charges by Jack Smith bringing an indictment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Okay.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record two documents. First, the superseding indictment against Donald Trump in the Southern District of Florida, where he is currently facing criminal charges on 40 counts, including obstruction of justice, lying to the FBI, his unlawful, willful retention of national defense
Without objection, the
information,
indictment
and
is
withholding the concealment
recognized.
of documents from
They're
law
like,
enforcement.
why did we do this?
Shortened version. And my second
40
document
felony
to clarify
counts.
for
40.
you, sir,
That's
Mr.
twice
Hur,
what any Republican can
from
count to.
the
And
transcription,
they have to take their shoes off.
page 82. The words are President Biden's. What month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. A searing memory. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection, the gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for this hearing, and thank you so much for spending so much time with us today, Special Counsel Hur. In accordance with the law, classified information must be treated with the highest respect and also protected. And President Biden has made it clear during this investigation and long before that he agrees. In response to Mr. Hur's report, he said, and I quote, "Over my career in public service, I've always worked to protect America's security. I take these issues seriously, and no one has ever questioned that," end quote. The special counsel's report makes clear that this is unfortunately a common occurrence for classified documents to get swept up into members of Congress or executive branches officials' personal effects. And as soon as President Biden discovered that he had mistakenly kept classified material, he took swift and immediate action to ensure that those materials were returned, and he fully cooperated with every step of your investigation.
There's the motherfucking
President Biden's
difference.
predecessor, when dealing with the issue of having classified materials, took very different steps. 2016, Donald Trump declared, and I quote, "I'm going to enforce all the laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law," end quote. Yet when his lawyer told him that it was going to be a crime if he didn't return the classified documents that he had after NARA, the DOJ, and the FBI requested multiple times that Trump returned the classified documents, yet he hid them.
In the
Trump
toilet.
himself acknowledged that the same year that service members have risked their lives to acquire classified intelligence to protect our country, yet he decided that his desire to keep these documents outweighed the potential loss of life for these people if those papers got out. Not only did Trump have a legal obligation, he also had a moral obligation to all of us, and he failed to live up to that. Mr. Hur, thank you for being here today. I'd like to talk about your report regarding President Biden
That's right,
and some of your
ML.
findings.
Mighty
And
librarian
for the
says
sake of
Trump
time,
isn't
if you
even
don't
charged with
mind answering
having
yes or
them. His
no,
charges are
please
mostly
answer
related
this
with
question.
obstruction.
Page
And
187 of your
Captain
report
Terp
reads,
says
at no
obstruction
point
and
did we find
conspiracy.
evidence that Mr. Biden
I
intended
agree.
or had reason to believe the information would be used to injure the United States or to benefit a foreign nation. Is this what you reported? For the sake of time, please answer yes or no.
Congresswoman, you said page 187?
Of your report, yes.
Yes. At no point did we find evidence. Yes, that language is on page 187.
Okay, so then this is what you reported, correct? Yes.
That language is in my report.
Okay, and Mr. Hur, you acknowledged on page 12 of your report that there are, as you said, numerous previous instances in which marked classified documents have been discovered intermixed with the personal papers of former executive branch officials and members of Congress. Please, once again, can you confirm for us, yes or no, the answer whether this is what you reported?
That language appears at page 12 of my report.
Page 323 also reads, as a matter of historical context, there have been numerous previous incidents in which marked classified documents have been discovered, intermixed with the personal papers of former executive branch officials and members of Congress. Is this what you reported?
That language appears at page 323.
Thank you. Now it's my understanding that this has happened before, where classified documents are swept up into official papers. So, Mr. Hur, aside from Donald Trump, are you aware of similar instances in history where officials who have had these classified documents engaged in a months-long elaborate scheme to hide those documents from federal law enforcement officials?
In the 1930s.
The one case that comes to mind that we do address in the report is the prosecution of General Petraeus.
So, are these historical examples, aside from Donald Trump, where officials instructed their aides to delete evidence pertaining to those classified documents?
That was not present in the Petraeus prosecution, no.
So the American people deserve, as we've always been saying all along here, that we deserve a leader who will not put themselves above the law, but will work with law enforcement and hold themselves accountable. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Wyoming is recognized.
Special Counsel Hur, when you determined that no criminal charges should be brought against President Biden in this matter, you focused on the specific facts surrounding the classified documents, where President Biden stored them, and on his memory and age. You wrote that President Biden's, quote, memory was significantly limited during his recorded interviews with the ghostwriter in 2017 and during his interview with the Special Counsel's Office in 2023. You also expressed concern that prospective jurors would be persuaded by President Biden's presentation as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Your assessment, however, was focused on how President Biden would
I was going to say, let's hear it for Santos.
If he stood trial. Is that correct?
That was an element of my explanation to the Attorney General for my
That's why
decision.
he
It was
mentioned
not the
anything
only
about jurors.
Okay, that wasn't my question, but it was one of the things that we were considering was his current state of mind, his current memory. Correct?
One of the things that I considered would be how, if a trial, whenever a trial theoretically were to be held, how President Biden would present himself to the jury if he elected to testify.
Okay. You did not compare President Biden's current memory or condition with his memory or condition when he was in the Senate or when he left the vice presidency and took the classified documents subject to your investigation. Is that right?
Actually, I believe that's not correct, Congresswoman. One of the things that's in the report is an assessment of the president's memory based on recordings from the 2016-2017 timeframe, recordings of conversations between Mr. Biden and his ghostwriter, and comparing that with the president's memory that he exhibited during our interview of him in October of 2023. So there was a comparison there.
Okay, so, but unless there was some issue undisclosed to the American people during his 50 years in office, You found that Mr. Biden fully understood his legal responsibility related to the handling of classified materials, which is why you concluded in your report that Mr. Biden, quote, willfully retained and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency when he was a private citizen.
Okay, chat, if you can show me a photo
I
of
believe that what I stated on page one
Hageman
was
and
that
Santos
he identified
together in the
evidence
same
that
room,
Mr. Biden willfully
you get to
retained
come on
classified
a private
information
stream.
after the end of his vice presidency. But ultimately, we concluded that the evidence was insufficient to warrant.
I understand that. Please listen to my question. What I'm getting at is that Mr. Biden fully understood that he could not keep classified information at his home as both a former senator and vice president. Isn't that right? He understood that, correct?
My understanding is that based on the evidence, my assessment was that a jury.
That isn't what my question was. Please listen to my question. My question was that Mr. Biden understood when he was a senator and vice president that he could not keep classified materials at his home, at his garage, and in other offices. Is that fair?
I don't think that's accurate, Congresswoman, because when Mr. Biden was vice president, he was authorized to have classified material in his home.
But after he left, he knew that he was not entitled to keep classified information at his home, correct?
After he left, there is evidence to suggest that he knew that he could not legally have classified information in his home. However, there is evidence with respect to his notebooks that he believed he was authorized to keep the notebooks at home based on precedent.
Based on precedent. You know, I guess the way that I would put it is this. President Biden knew better. He knew that he wasn't entitled to keep these documents from when he was a senator, and he knew he wasn't entitled to keep these documents after he had left the vice presidency. But because he's now suffering from an impaired memory, as you so delicately put it, he got away with it.
Shut the hell up, lady.
Congresswoman, what I stated in my report is that
She's fishing so much she should be on the fucking Gorton's box.
could infer to suggest that Mr. Biden willfully retained and disclosed national defense information. But in my judgment, the likely outcome of a trial, the probable outcome of a trial, is not a conviction.
I have represented a variety of clients over the years in actions against the federal government over, in fact, several decades of time. It's been my experience that the federal government, the DOJ specifically, has essentially unlimited resources to go after and prosecute citizens and will spare absolutely no expense in doing so. It has also been my experience that the DOJ is not only overly aggressive in these cases, but makes it clear that part of the reason for such aggression is to make an example of the poor soul who is the subject of such action. In other words, so that other people will not
In
engage
other
in the
words,
same kind of
you
conduct.
need to play the victim.
Mr. Hur, having been a long-term DOJ prosecutor, can you please explain why those people without the last name of Clinton or Biden are typically treated quite differently and seem to be the only ones who are never held accountable for violating the law?
What is Clinton and Page?
Congresswoman, one of the things that I explain in my report is the fact that there are historical precedents with respect to former occupants of the White House and their retention of classified materials after they leave.
I'm asking specifically about Mrs. Clinton and Mrs. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden.
Congresswoman, I don't have any opinion to articulate
Clinton
with
was never
respect to the
president.
investigation relating to Mrs. Clinton.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Hur, Special Counsel Jack Smith has charged Donald Trump with 40 counts related to his unlawful possession of classified documents. The most serious charge carries a penalty of 20 years in prison. According to the Trump indictment, Trump stored those documents at Mar-a-Lago, which, quote, hosted events for tens of thousands of members and guests, end quote. The indictment continues, quote, Trump stored his boxes containing classified documents in various locations at the Mar-a-Lago Club, including in a ballroom, a bathroom, and a shower, an office space, his bedroom, and a storage room. Mar-a-Lago is more than a mansion or a compound. It is a club with a membership program that sells access to the public. It has hundreds of people moving through it at any given time. Staffing it alone required 150 staff members. And while those classified national security documents sat in places like his ballroom, Trump hosted more than 150 social events, like weddings and movie premieres, which thousands of people attended. In brief, Special Counsel Smith has alleged that Trump willfully and knowingly took highly classified documents to a location accessible by tens of thousands of people. Mr. Hur, was President Biden's residence accessible to tens of thousands of people?
No.
Did President Biden ever bring tens of thousands of people into spaces where he stored classified material?
Not to my knowledge.
Did Joe Biden advertise and sell memberships to his home that would allow members of the public to have access?
Not that I'm aware of.
Fucking
Did your
brutal.
investigation find that Joe Biden ever hosted movie premieres at his home while classified documents were stored there?
No.
Moving on, among the
New Democratic
150
Party.
staff members working at Mar-a-Lago was a Trump
Love
aide
it.
named Walt Nauta. According to Special Counsel Smith, Trump ordered Nauta to move boxes of documents so that they could not be found by people looking for them. Mr. Hur, did President Biden ever direct his staff to move documents so that you or the FBI could not find them?
We did not identify evidence of that.
In fact, according to your report, as soon as Bob Bauer discovered material in President
This is like
Biden's
Clue.
residence, he
It was the
contacted
Democrats
John
in the
Lausch,
committee room
and the
with the
president
sledgehammer.
immediately consented
It
to
was
an
the
FBI
James
search
Comer
of his home. Is that
in the
correct?
committee room
report does state
with his dick in his
And you
hand.
found no evidence that any documents were moved prior to that
Put
search.
some
Is that
hair
correct?
gel.
Correct.
That's in stark contrast to Donald Trump. President Biden did
That would
not
glue his
obstruct your
hand to his dick
investigation.
if he
He
had
was
that gel on
fully
it.
compliant.
Super glue.
And with access to
Like
the
it was
millions of
super glue.
documents he gave you and dozens of hours of witness interviews he facilitated, you were able to fully and totally exonerate him of any
Miss Escobar's
criminal
from
wrongdoing.
El
I thank you,
Paso.
Mr. Hur.
That's
And,
right,
before I
motherfucking
yield back, Mr.
exoneration.
Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an excerpt from the committee's transcribed interview with Stephen D'Antuono, former Assistant Director in charge of the FBI Washington Field Office, on June 7th, 2023, in which Mr. D'Antuono explained that the FBI executed a search warrant for classified material at Mar-a-Lago because there was probable cause to believe that Donald Trump did not fully comply with a subpoena to turn over classified documents.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized. Oh, excuse me, gentleman from the ranking member is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have 3 unanimous consent requests.
All right.
First, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the publisher's webpage for President Biden's 2017 book, Promise Me Dad, which shows that the book is a deeply moving memoir about the year
Okay.
that President Biden's son, Bo, died.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to enter page 97 of Mr. Hur's report, which says that President Biden's book is not known to contain classified information.
Without objection.
Finally, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a February 5th, 2024 letter from President Biden's counsel to Special Counsel Hur that clarifies that President Biden's 2017 book, quote, does not contain classified information, and there has never been any suggestion to the contrary, close quote.
Without objection. Chair now recognizes gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Special Counsel Hur, for joining us here today to discuss your investigation regarding President Biden's mishandling of classified documents. This has become an issue of great interest to all Americans and, of course, to all of us here today. As is outlined in your report, despite the discovery of confidential and top-secret records located in the president's personal residence in Delaware, including in his garage, office, and
looks like
basement,
you might
the
have
Department
a
declined
winner on
prosecution,
the
and my colleagues'
Santos
questions today
Hagerman.
have focused on the highlights from your report, specifically referring to President Biden's mental capacity, his willful disregard for the law as a private citizen, and how he would be perceived if presented to a jury of his peers. Dependent upon, and I'll use your
Here's
words
a
from the
question.
report,
How many things
how
have
this
they entered
sympathetic,
into the record
well-meaning
thus far?
elderly man with a poor memory
Or
handled
do they
and
just keep
managed
quoting the same
storage
quote
of these
over and
confidential
over?
documents.
It's like
national
the Hunter
security of
Biden's
the United
laptop.
States might have been put at great risk because of the president's behavior. And so one of the things we must consider today is how we can ensure that our national security will not be continually put at risk when under the leadership of the same well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Since the release of the report,
she
to
talking
your
about Trump?
knowledge, has the Justice Department started to analyze a damage assessment of what may have been disclosed by these documents being mishandled and any ongoing national security risks from the inappropriate storage and retention of the documents?
Congresswoman, my understanding is that such a damage assessment is underway in coordination and cooperation with the members of the intelligence community.
And do you today, for us, have any information about the status of that investigation or how long it might take to conclude?
I do not, Congresswoman.
I'd like to turn your attention to a discussion of the distinction between proving the underlying elements of an offense and the concept of an obstruction of justice charge. Is it correct, Special Counsel Hur, that in some circumstances as a federal prosecutor, you may investigate the underlying offense, an underlying offense, choose not to charge that offense, but still have developed sufficient evidence to charge a defendant with obstruction of justice?
I think as a matter of law, theoretically, that could occur. I can't bring to mind specific examples of that happening, but I suppose that if that were to happen, it would be a more difficult case to try from a prosecutor's
Well, the elements are distinct, though, are they not?
They are a distinct element.
And isn't it similar to a case where a federal prosecutor undergoes an investigation and ultimately doesn't pursue the original charge they were investigating?
So little
but
evidence.
during the course of the investigation,
They need
concludes
a
that
bigger
false
net.
statement was made to a federal law enforcement officer and brings
Yeah,
a
it's
charge
very
under
hard to charge someone with
1001.
obstruction.
That could
if
happen.
You can't get them
Yes.
for the actual
And
crime.
again, there too,
because
the elements would
you
be
have to show
different.
that they obstructed
Correct.
And
something
in reaching your
legitimate.
final decision related to the declination
I
of the
think
recommendation
that the
to decline
obstruction
prosecution,
charge
you
and why
considered
he's only
both
being
the
charged with
underlying elements of
obstruction
the
is because
offenses
of
at
that.
issue and also the principles of federal prosecution. Is that right?
Correct.
Fuck the
Now,
documents. He
the
obstructed.
principles of federal prosecution, those are things that may vary case to case. Is that right?
I think it's
Fact
a
of the
bigger
matter
charge.
is,
Federal prosecution are very
Biden
fact
gave
and
the shit
circumstance
back.
dependent.
Trump
elements
did
of the
not.
criminal offense
Pence
are
gave the
not.
shit back.
Isn't that also correct?
Trump did not.
Yep.
Elements are
And
defined
I'm
by
pretty sure
law,
Trump had
and they do not
way
vary from
more
case to case.
than
And thus,
either
those
one
elements of the underlying criminal offense
Answer
would be
Biden.
exactly the same from one defendant to the next to the next. Isn't that
Employee
right?
number 5 says he
So you
moved
would
boxes
expect,
to
would you not,
Bedminster.
that a prosecutor who was considering the
and wife number
underlying
one
offenses
knows
that
where
you
they
were
are.
considering
It's buried
would be
beside
looking
wife
at
number
exactly the
one
same
or
elements and
buried with
requirements of
wife
proof
number
that you
one.
did on the underlying charges?
Prosecutors assessing their cases under the same statutes must consider the same elements with respect to those statutes.
Chella
Thank you,
Abram,
Special Counsel Hur.
1963,
And then
says
if we could,
Trump has
turn
obstructed
back
every
to the
court
concept
case he's
of
ever
those,
been in, for fuck's
principles of
sake. And
federal
that's true
prosecution.
because Roy
Those
Cohn was his
are the
mentor.
additional factors
And Roy
aggravating
Cohn
or
taught him
mitigating
legal
that you might consider
warfare.
in ultimately
One of
reaching
the
a charge's
biggest things
decision here.
ever
Is that
was
right?
just run the other guy
They
out
do
of
include
money by
such
just
things that
consistently
are referred to as
appealing because,
aggravating
you know,
and
he
mitigating
There's
was a
one thing I want
millionaire
to
when
go
he was
back to,
8
though, to
years
be
old.
clear. It's been said today that your report is tantamount to a
It's like,
total
why go
exoneration
to
of President
therapy and
Biden.
try to
That's
become a
not
better
correct.
person when
That
you
is not
can
correct.
just
All right.
become the
Thank you,
worst
sir. I
person
yield
you
the balance of
can
my
and
time to the
hire a
chair.
lawyer?
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank
Oh,
you,
there's going to
Mr.
be some
Hur,
reactions on
also
Roy
for
Cohn.
your patience.
Don't
You're
you worry.
almost to what, 3.5 hours? So almost
That
as much as
scumbag
mine.
is not going to go unchecked on this
Throughout
channel.
your report, you repeatedly cite and credit a number of innocent explanations for the presence of classified materials at the president's home and other locations. Innocent explanations that you admit that you cannot refute. And I'd like to just focus on a few of them, and I'll give you citations. One of these explanations for the presence of classified documents is that a member of the president's staff maintained those documents when he was the vice president, and then mistakenly included them in sets of documents that were later sent to to locations such as the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, but if you have a specific page number for me, that would help me, Congressman.
We'll get you one. That would be great. You also found that another innocent explanation to be more
Yes, he did work
likely
for
than
Nixon
a criminal
along with Roger
explanation
Stone.
for the presence of
Shell Abram.
classified documents that were found at the Penn Biden Center and the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. And then let's talk about the documents in the
Money
president's
librarian
garage.
says, I bet those
As you
documents
noted,
weren't
a
nuclear
reasonable
secrets
juror
either.
could
No,
conclude
I
that
don't
the
think they
location
were.
of the documents, surrounded by household jobs,
I know they
is not a
certainly
place where a
didn't
person
need a
knowingly and
skiff,
intentionally stores
and they also
classified
weren't
documents that
the
are
highest
critical to
level of
his legacy.
classification possible.
Instead,
And I had
it
a
looks more
fucking
like a place where a
secret
person stores
bordering on top
classified
secret.
documents that he's unaware of. That's on page 209.
I had
of your
top secret for
report,
certain
correct?
things when I was in the
That
military.
is something that a reasonable
They'd give
juror
me
could factor into his or her consideration of
interim
whether or not the president
clearance,
had criminal
but I
willful
always had
intent.
secret.
And you also noted that President Biden was allowed to have classified documents in his home for 8 years as vice president, and then again when he was president, and that he also had layers of staff who were responsible for assembling, carrying, storing, and retrieving these types of classified documents.
Correct.
And because of these facts, you determined it was, quote, entirely possible that the president did not know he still had some of these documents in his home when his vice presidency ended in 2017. That's on page 215.
Let me just go ahead and flip through the shit that I wrote myself. I don't remember writing it because I felt it full of so much bullshit towards the end.
Like when you need to hit a
Entirely
specific word
possible.
count on an essay.
Yeah. So that's the citation. I'm going to keep going
I'm
because
going to need
my
to see some
time is
home
running
row,
while
Mr.
you're
Hur.
looking. So you also cite the president's cooperation with your investigation as evidence that he did not have criminal intent. And I want to quote you here because this is important. You wrote, most significantly, Mr. Biden self-reported to the government that the Afghanistan documents were in his Delaware garage and consented to the search of his house to retrieve them and other classified materials. He also
Oh, that
consented to
explains
searches
it.
of other
Consent.
locations, and later in the investigation, he participated in an interview with
No
our
wonder.
office that lasted more than 5 hours and provided written answers to most of our written questions. Many will conclude that a president who knew he was illegally storing classified documents in his home would not have allowed such a search of his home to discover those documents and then answered the government's questions afterwards, page 210. And then you said that you expect this argument about the president's innocence to carry real force for many reasonable jurors, because in your words, reasonable jurors will conclude that Mr. Biden, a powerful, sophisticated person with access to the best advice in the world, would not have handed the government classified documents from his own home on a silver platter if he had willfully retained those documents for years. Just as a person who destroys evidence and lies
Like Mark
often
Meadows?
proves his guilt,
Like,
a
who
person
fucking burned
produces
papers in the
evidence
fireplace
and
nightly so much that his wife was like,
seen
yo,
by
you smell
many
like
to
a
be
chimney
innocent.
sweep.
Again, page 210. As you said in your report, it would be reasonable for a juror to reach that conclusion.
Right.
And that a president
comes
advised by
home looking like
counsel
Dick
would
Van
not have
Dyke and Mary
informed
Poppins.
investigators of the presence of classified documents in his home.
Good
or
luck will
invited
rub off,
agents
even
in the
though I
search
won't
of
give
every
Ukraine a
nook
penny.
and cranny of his home or other residence, or sat
Singing
for an
Steppin' Tom.
hours-long interview, or answered pages of written questions, all going to his full cooperation and his lack of criminal
No,
intent.
oh,
Thank you, Mr.
that was
Chairman,
wrong.
and I
Mark
yield back.
Meadows
Gentlelady yields back. Mr.
wouldn't be
Hur, we got
responsible
3
for
more we're
that.
gonna
He
do.
was the
Then we're
one
gonna
that
take votes, and then
was
we'll just have
talking
a
with
couple more
Ginny
after that.
Thomas on
So we'll start with,
January
the gentleman
6th
from
about
Kentucky is
Biden being in
recognized.
Gitmo.
Yield to the chairman.
So,
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Hur, are you opposed
is Biden
to the
in
U.S.
Gitmo
Congress
right now,
having access
chat?
to the
I
audio
was
tapes of the
curious.
people you interviewed during your investigation?
Chairman, I am not in a position to articulate an opinion one way or the other. That is not really up to me. I'm a former employee of the Department of Justice. I would refer you to the White House and DOJ leadership.
You're an accomplished lawyer. Is there any reason why we shouldn't, why the United States Congress shouldn't have access to the same information you had access to, and that was the basis of your decision?
Chairman, it is not for me to opine on what materials.
Well, the
He's
Justice
doing the
Department
same thing
released
where
the
he tried to
transcripts the
get
day
the
of hearing.
evidence
Nice
from
of you to have them
Letitia
in a more,
James,
I
too,
think, a
and she
better
told
time
him
for
to
the
go
committee
pound
prepare
sand.
for our questioning for you. They released them today. White House and the Justice Department released them today. It'd be nice if we actually had the audio tapes too. Again, is there any reason why you can see why the American people and their representatives in the United States Congress should not have access to those tapes?
You mean
Chairman,
like
what I
why
can
the
tell you
American
is that
people should have been
my
able to see Hunter
assessment, that
Biden
went
testify
into
in
the
public, but you won't
that I
because
described
once
in my
more the
report
only thing
was
Comer
based
has
not solely
for
on the
evidence
transcript.
is
It
what
was
he can
based
find
on all
behind
of the
his
evidence,
zipper if he
including the
reaches
audio
downwards.
recordings.
Great point, and that's where I was going. So this was valuable evidence
A
for
handful
you
of
as the special
schmeckle.
counsel named to investigate this issue, valuable evidence for you to reach your conclusion, and the statements you put in your report. And all I'm asking is, shouldn't the United States Congress have access to that same information?
Chairman, again, it is not for me to weigh into what
Not
information
everything
Congress
is
should or should not have.
for
What I will
everybody.
tell you is that the audio recordings were part of the evidence, of course, that I considered in coming to my conclusions.
I will yield back to the gentleman from Kentucky and hopefully can yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Yield to the gentleman from North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Hur. In Chapter 8 of your book, or your report, you detail that Mr. Biden retained in his Delaware basement classified documents relating back to his time as a U.S. Senator in the 70s, correct?
Correct.
And even more Senate papers dating back to the 70s through 1991 were found in the
He's going to say,
University of
yes,
Delaware,
that's
Morris
correct.
Libraries,
And then they're going to
Biden's
say,
Senate papers collection, correct?
Correct.
and when
And
he
even
was
more
asked to
Senate
turn
papers
them
dating
over,
back to
did
the
he?
1970s
But they
and
won't say
1980s were
that.
found in
But we
Biden's
all
Delaware
know.
garage.
It's
I believe
they're
that's,
just
yes, that's
trying
correct.
to
And quote,
both
Mr.
sides
Biden
it
had
because
nearly
they
50
want
years
people to think
experience
that
dealing with
Biden is
classified
as dirty
information,
as
including
Trump.
as a member of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Judiciary, a member and chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, and Vice President of the United States, and that he was deeply familiar with the measures taken to safeguard classified information and the reasons for them, correct?
That language certainly sounds familiar, Congressman, but if you have a page citation for me, I can confirm.
And as Vice President, is it correct that in 2011, Mr. Biden received advice from his staff about the need to secure classified information in the form of notes,
Correct.
including his first counsel, Cynthia Hogan?
Correct.
And he was advised in writing in 2011 by Hogan that classified notes must be obtained in secure safes and stored in secure facility.
Correct.
His second counsel, John McGail, also advised Biden that all of Mr. Biden's records, including his notes, would be sent to the National Archives, and Biden understood and accepted that, correct?
That's correct, with the exception that Mr. McGrail was Vice President Biden's final counsel, not his second one.
All right. And on his way out, Mr. Biden was also appraised of his obligations by the National Archives staff twice more that his classified notes should be secured in a SCIF.
That particular fact is not immediately coming to mind, Congressman, but if you have a page citation, I can confirm it for you.
Did Mr. Biden have 30 years' experience handling this information? He received advice from at least two separate
No
counsels,
page
the
citation?
National Archives
Yes.
staff. And he has
Biden was
demonstrated
handling
the
this
knowledge of the law to
information when Trump
attack
was trying to
President
sell
Trump in
board
public over
games.
the same exact issue in detail. This is where I get into this. I just have a problem with this. In your report and this testimony, a reasonable person would conclude that Mr. Biden knowingly retained national defense.
Well, it's funny
information and
because
failed to deliver
Theron
it to an
says
appropriate
that this
government
highlights
official,
how much
and
the
that he
system
knew his
for handling
conduct was
classified
unlawful.
docs
And I
needs to
think
be
that's where we end
reformed.
up here, and that's what
It
the
just
point
makes
is.
me laugh
For the
because
last three election
when I
cycles,
was
there's only been three
in the
people who have ran
Navy,
for
I
president.
swear, like
Hillary Clinton,
one
Joe
time
Biden,
I
Donald
put the
Trump.
wrong document in the burn
All
bag,
three
like
of
didn't put it in the
them have
burn
been
bag. I
accused
put
of
it in
mishandling
the
classified
unclassified bag.
Only one of them
And
has been
they
prosecuted.
jumped down my asshole.
That's
They
what the
set up a
American people
kiddie
say.
pool and had
That's
a
what we say.
lemonade.
Hillary Clinton, who ran a program called Bleach It on her server, they used hammers to destroy evidence. Joe Biden has a 50-year history of misplacing classified documents in numerous different places. All of these cases have the same underlying elements of the
So
crime.
for Trump
the
to
same
get the
fact
treatment that he
patterns,
got,
and yet we only see one person being prosecuted.
still tried to move stuff and still got caught moving stuff.
When time's expiring, you bet.
Gentleman yields back. The ranking member is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
And he mentions bleach it.
in light of what the chairman
algorithm
previously said, I
Bleach
ask
It
unanimous
actually
consent
implements
that
is called the
all
DoD
transcribed
standard
interviews taken by the
security
committee
race.
this year
That's
be
what you're
made public.
supposed to use.
There's an objection to that. The gentlelady from Missouri is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Hur. St. Louis and I are here today once again to focus on the real issues that affect our communities instead of partisan hit jobs. Let me start by saying that the potential mishandling of classified information is a serious issue, and I believe it was appropriate for the Attorney General to appoint both special counsels in the Biden and Trump cases. As my colleagues have pointed out, President Biden fully complied with the investigation conducted by Special Counsel Hur, who did not find evidence sufficient to warrant criminal charges. Despite this outcome, Republicans have used the special counsel's report to further their longstanding efforts to re-elect the former white supremacist in chief, Donald Trump, who faces 40 criminal charges related to the mishandling of classified documents, including obstruction of justice. While President Biden returned all of the classified material and complied with the special counsel's investigation, let's remind ourselves what Donald Trump has said and done. He refused to turn over the classified documents in his possession to the National Archives. He is on tape sharing documents he said he could have declassified when he was president. He wrongly claimed in an interview that the Presidential Records Act allows him to do whatever he wants, and he was allowed to do everything he did. He also said on his right-wing social media platform, quote, "I'm allowed to do all of this." He continues to admit to his possession of these documents on the campaign trail. So this hearing is not a good faith oversight effort. It is just the latest in a long line of dysfunctional and destructive actions taken by this Republican majority. They don't care about responsible governance or making people's lives better. They don't have an affirmative agenda. They are throwing whatever they can at the wall and hoping it sticks, and they have zero credibility to talk about mental acuity when they support Donald Trump. The same Donald Trump who mixes up Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi. The same Donald Trump who incorrectly pronounced the words Venezuela, respected, and United States. The same Donald Trump who calls January 6 defendants hostages. And the same Donald Trump who believed bleach injections would treat COVID-19. It is deeply hypocritical for anyone who champions this man for the presidency to talk about the mental acuity of anyone else. But this is nothing new. This has been a consistent pattern of the Republican majority in this
They talk about bleach bit, we talk about bleach injections.
The sham impeachment investigation that has completely collapsed to the absurd impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. Republicans have solely focused on destroying the incumbent president, destroying the Democratic Party, destroying progressive movements for social justice, all so that they can re-elect one of the worst presidents of all time. Now, it is well known that I have disagreements with President Biden on certain issues. My concerns are rooted in the desire to
This entire hearing has just
and help him take better
if the Republican and Trump crimes were a page that just wouldn't load, this was them hitting the fucking refresh button.
They are trying everything they can to turn back the clock on our rights and our freedoms, and we cannot take the bait. Let's focus on policy. Let's focus on substance. Let's focus on saving and improving the lives of our constituents.
If this was a fight, the ref would have stopped it in the first 5 minutes.
Not misusing the precious time and resources of this committee. Not being dishonest just because it serves our political interests.
I think I saw this fight in the movie Snatch.
We are better than that. And our country deserves better than all of this. I will continue to reject these absurd distractions from the investments we need in the communities that we represent.
I think I saw this fight in the movie There Will Be Blood.
On that instead of this irresponsible and easily repudiated.
Why don't you heal my boy?
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for a number of things.
I recognize myself
testify today.
when no one's around.
Second, thank you also for sharing
nobody else recognizes him.
Testimony.
I don't know who that
an
is.
extraordinary story of them coming to
The
America.
motherfucker looked like he came out of the
Third, let me
Republican
also
Play-Doh
thank
Fun
you
Factory.
For your in-depth investigation and your detailed report, and generally for your service as special counsel. It's not something that I think many people would look for, and certainly comes with a lot of burden. So thank
Called
you
the Build
for
a
your
Fash
work.
workshop.
In your opening statement, you described your investigation as, quote, thorough and independent, and I agree with that. One where you attempted to give, quote, rigorous and detailed analysis. I also agree with that. And one where you say you, quote, must show your work.
Welcome,
which we
Mr.
very much
Ratchet.
appreciate today.
How you
We don't normally see
doing?
that. Did I recall your opening statement correctly as it relates to those quotes?
Came for the snark, I see.
In fact, as part of your investigation, you interviewed about 150 different witnesses. You looked at millions of different documents because you wanted to do a thorough investigation.
We're going to be
Isn't that
raiding
true?
out to Tony
And
fairly
you did this
soon.
because you took your investigation
Yeah, there's
extremely
about as much
seriously,
left to
and
this
you wanted
as
to
there is
reach
into the
accurate
hour,
conclusions,
so.
correct?
Okay, so
And let's
rock
review
and
some of
roll.
your specific findings regarding the
Because it
issues
ends at
pertaining to competency and
3:45-ish.
mental capacity of President Biden. Because as you say, this is very important to whether or not there was criminal willful intent. As you can see, I've set forth a number of different quotes up here on this board that I've prepared, some of which I'll read to you. Page 5, you say Mr. Biden's, quote, Mr. Biden's memory was significantly limited.
We're going to
Again, on
raid
page
out.
6, you say
So
Mr. Biden
when
would likely present himself to a jury
we're finished, I'll go
as a
ahead and go to my
sympathetic,
end
well-meaning,
screen,
elderly man
and
with
then
a
we'll
poor
just raid
memory.
out together if
Then
y'all
on page
want.
207, you say Mr. Biden's memory also appeared to have significant limitations. And then again on page 208, he did not remember when he was vice president, and he did not remember even within several years when his son
Nathaniel
voted.
Moron? I mean,
You
Moran?
finally make the statement on page 248, quote, for these jurors, Mr. Biden's apparent lapses and failures in February and April 2017 will likely appear consistent with the diminished capacities and faulty memory he showed. Those were astounding conclusions to me, and as I look through those quotes, I have to say I hearken back to my time before Congress. I was a judge, and one of the things that I oversaw was guardianships. And frankly, when I read your conclusions, red flags began to go up in my mind because I oversaw hundreds of guardianships back in Texas. And as I saw your conclusions, I began to wonder, what does the D.C. statute say about guardianships, and how do you define an incapacitated individual in Washington, D.C.? And I want to show you this statute. Because I
What in the
presume, are you
motherfuck does
familiar
this
with the
have to
statute
do
at all?
with? Are they sitting here still trying to pretend that Biden is old when we know that he's old, but they keep trying to say that he is not mentally sharp when, I mean, after Swalwell presented that, wouldn't you want to like hide this, like just out of fucking shame? But like, I mean, I get that like they need to get their sound bites, but god damn, I mean, if you have a humiliation kink, this is the way to go, I suppose.
An incapacitated individual under the guardianship statute in the District of Columbia. And quite frankly, I see tons of overlap from what you set forth in your testimony, in your written report, and the definition here.
The Captain
phrases
Terp
are
says
almost
after
identical.
State of the Union, they
I
just
would
need to
posit
give up.
that if
And
he cannot
if
manage
that's not
national
honest to God
top
truth, I don't
secret
know what
resources,
is.
I'm not sure how he can manage his personal financial resources. And given your report's findings that his memory was, quote, significantly limited, and that he is a person with, quote, diminished faculties, and with, quote, faulty memory, it makes me wonder how close he is coming to meeting this definition of an incapacitated individual, such that he should
I knew that's
have
what they
a
were going
guardian
to try to go
appointed by the
for.
DC courts for his personhood. There is at least, I believe, a prima facie argument to say that there is substantial evidence to indicate such. And you mentioned it's not just what you've written in the report, but it was the demeanor of President Biden as you interviewed him. I'll say in conclusion, whether he does or does not meet this definition, I believe your findings raise significant concerns about his current fitness for the office of the president, and certainly his fitness going forward in the future.
Now do Trump.
And I appreciate the fact that you were brazen enough to raise this issue in this report because you knew this would be significant in your
Mr. Hur,
findings.
did you find
But
any
did so
evidence in your
based on
report that
a very
Mr. Biden
significant, very
paints
detailed,
himself
very
orange?
thorough.
Okay, I want to know how like he's saying
doing your duty in
that
such a
he's
way.
being
Special counsel. I yield
weaponized,
back.
but then
Gentleman yields
at the
back.
same time, the
Mr.
Democrats
Hur, we
are
have
being
votes on the
like,
floor. We have a few more
I just
members who will
the
do their
amount
5
of
minutes
cognitive
questioning.
dissonance
So we're
that
gonna
it
recess,
takes to
and
ask
then,
these
we will convene
questions.
10 minutes after the conclusion
It's like
of the last
they
vote.
just
I believe we
practiced in the
only have a
mirror,
couple votes.
like a fucking
Two
kata.
votes. We'll get back here as soon as we can, and there's food in the back room for. I think we still have some left that you're welcome to. With that, we stand in recess until 10 minutes after the last.
All righty, gang. That was that was certainly an enlightening experience. I haven't seen someone take a beating like that since I went ahead and rewatched some old Tyson knockouts, because that was Facts don't care about feelings, apparently. That's what they say, right? That's what they say.
That wasn't even a Tyson knockout. That was a full 15-round beating.
Go to skipfranzjr.net for podcasts.
Record player that, I could just spin records all the time.
Run into the bathroom and I'm covered in blood. Like I had put my tooth through my bottom lip.
For music. For gaming and pro-liberty game rants. That's skipfranzjr.net.